Heather Kahn was pushing her cleaning cart from one guest cabin to the other, lost in thought and listening to her music to distract herself from the noise of the guests and also to distract herself from her own job. Over 20 years in housekeeping. She started immediately after she graduated from secondary school. She was balancing buckets and scrubbing ceilings. At first, it was what she did to help pay for classes, but then classes had to be put on hold for rent, and then a hold became a drop, and eventually the drop became permanent. Every year, she was promising to herself that she would return to school, take night classes, look into community college, take some online certifications, take advantage of the free classes at her library. All promises that were eventually broken by herself. Housekeeping in her small town barely paid more than minimum wage, and rent was barely covered by minimum wage. After a long hour of cleaning rooms, some mostly cleaned, others essentially trashed, she would go home barely able to eat and sleep before going back to work again. Before she knew it, she was looking at 40 and she was still struggling to make rent. The night she decided to work on the Naglfari, she had 3 different letters in her hand. The first letter was from the hotel she was working at in Portishead. It was an announcement that there was going to be wage freezes this year, and bonuses were not going to be paid out this year either. Signed by the new owner of the hotel's signature. He was the son of the old owner who hired Heather the same day as her graduation. The next letter was what she got when it was tucked into the door frame of her one-room apartment. A kitchen, a toilet, a shower, and a living space, all in the same space. It was an announcement from the landlord that rent was increasing 10%. The final letter was a job announcement for Naglfari, what she got from her mailbox. The Naglfari was the newest cruise ship built in Portishead. They were hiring experienced housekeeping staff, and they were offering nearly twice as much for the same work, plus they would pay for room and board. After everything else that happened that day, it seemed like a good idea to apply for work on the cruise ship. Work there for the year and save up for a better life. What Heather didn't realize going in was that what was coming with the double pay was triple work. In a hotel, you could step outside for a moment. You could leave after your shift was done. You could stop being a housekeeper for a few hours. Here on the cruise ship, you were working or you were in your shared quarters. Crew's quarters were kept below the waterline, with small cabins, with a roommate, and a heavy door you had to be careful with. It opened slowly, but it was also built to keep water out if the ship was starting to sink. So getting a finger or an arm in would be disastrous. The Naglfari had a state-of-the-art casino, buffet, and even arcades, all of which were not to be used by staff while guests were on the ship. So even though Heather was making more money now than at any point in her life, and eating better since the cruise food was much better than what she was living off of in Portishead, it came at the high price of her work. Housekeeping had maybe 100 staff, and there were 6,000 guests on board. Even evenly dividing it, that meant up to 60 cabins per housekeeper. And just like hotel rooms on land, people were absolute slobs. Heather had already cleaned up cigarette ash from over a dozen rooms, despite the ship being a smoke-free ship. People left hairs in the bathroom sink, left enough crumbs on the ground to feed a starving country, left sheets and blankets on the ground. Sometimes much more disgusting things were left behind, all of which fell to housekeepers like Heather to clean. But despite the heavy work and the cleaning, some rooms were better kept than others. One of the rooms in her area had the courtesy to make both their beds and keep the trash in the trash can, making it a much easier job. But the floors still needed to be vacuumed, the surfaces needed to be wiped down, and trash needed to be thrown. Even the cleanest guest took time to clean after, especially if it was to be done right. Heather was very familiar with cleaning hotels at land. At sea, it was much harder. Passengers were in their rooms for weeks at a time. A speck of saliva on a single surface could stick for hours if not scrubbed. Then it could hitch a ride on her outfit and be in every cabin before the day was over. So, Heather was certain to take pains to keep her cabin clean. And a perk of working at sea, rather than on land, is that guests usually tip housekeeping. In every room there was a small copper bowls marked for housekeeping that was in every cabin. They usually left a few pounds for cleaning the room, but not all passengers from Albion, and not everyone tipped in pounds. Quatchley and sesterces were very common. Colorful cotton bills, one with an eagle eating a snake on a cactus, and the other with an eagle clutching a sword. She wasn't sure what they were worth compared to pounds, but her roommate said it was worth a lot, so that was good. Other passengers, however, tipped in centi, which she did understand the conversion rate, but she always felt dirty touching the old copper coins. They always felt like they were soaked in blood, and the smell of old copper didn't help that visualization at all. But Heather needed the money, so she would take the coins, albeit reluctantly, doing her best to forget where it came from, and promising to exchange it for civilized currency as soon as she could. Other passengers left the strangest things in their tip bowls. The cabins with children usually left behind candy, gum, drawings, and once Heather even found a thank you card written in crayon left in the copper bowl. That note was now hanging next to her bed. Those weren't too bad. It was even kind of sweet that a child appreciated a clean room so much that they wanted to give some candy to the one cleaning it. One passenger, oddly enough, tipped her in pontoon chips, while his son left behind a drawing of dinosaurs. But it also wasn't uncommon for a tip bowl to be filled with nothing but dust, or worse, used as an ashtray. Heather had no doubts about what those passengers thought about housekeeping. Still lost in her thoughts as she finished up this cabin, she moved on to her last cabin of the day. One of the strangest she had seen in her 20 years of cleaning. It was immaculate as the day she left it before. The cabin was practically untouched. The bed was still made and tucked in. There were no clothes on the floor, no water in the bathroom, no trash in the wastebasket. The fridge had no fingerprints on the glass, and the curtains were still half drawn, showing the ocean outside. Despite herself, Heather paused to look out at the ocean. It was beautiful, the way it glittered from the sun, and even though it was a long way down, the ocean felt like it could hide anything. All the wonders, the treasures, the dangers, and the monsters of the world could be hiding just beneath the waves, ignorant of Heather, and her ignorant of them. This was another reason why she enjoyed working on the Naglfari. This was where the ocean could be beautiful. In Portishead, the ocean always looked gray. Here, she could watch the sun turn the blue into beautiful jewels, and she could see so much more of the world. Isle City, Kart Hadasht, Zama, and so many other beautiful cities. Sure, she'd have to work most of the time, but still, considering she never left Portishead before, but now she could see the world, that alone was an upgrade in her life. Heather was certain of that. After wiping down the bathroom, removing the old but unfolded towels, replacing with fresh towels, Heather moved on to sheets and blankets. Even though the blankets were unused, Naglfari prided itself on cleanliness and changed them daily. The new sheets on, the old ones in the cart. Then Heather began to spray the surfaces. Spray onto the rag and then rag to the dresser, wiping it down. The disinfectant did its job. Even though no dust, no dirt, and no dread divoted the dresser, the disinfectant demolished deadly diseases. Heather imagined how her cleanliness was the only thing keeping all the passengers safe and healthy. She heard many stories about how a simple mistake could crash a cruise. Those were drilled in by the training, but you rarely heard about how an exceptionally well done job prevented a disaster. People like Heather were expected to do their job and go. But it was all too easy to forget that an everyday, well-done job could prevent disasters. Clean plates kept a lethal allergic reaction from occurring. Proper pipes prevented cholera by bringing in blue water and removing gray water. Housekeeping kept rooms safe for people to be in. Lost in her thoughts of preventing a pandemic of pertussis, her eyes noticed the tip bowl before her mind caught up. Sitting in the copper bowl was a slip of paper. For your trouble. And the note was resting on a small pile of gold and coins. There were at least a dozen auras resting in the dish, possibly even more, each one with the seal of the Emperor of the Seven Cities. A single aura was worth as much as a month of working on the ship, and there was at least a year's worth of her salary just sitting in that copper bowl. Heather felt like she was going to throw up while looking at that gold. Being tipped in centi was one thing. She could tell herself they didn't know any better, or that they were just innocent civilians of a cruel empire. But a single aura was worth 2,000 centi. Anyone who was tipping this much wasn't someone innocent. They were someone who could have only gotten that much by doing something truly cruel. If centi were coated in blood, then auras were dripping in venom. Heather thought about the child soldiers, the immoral business practices, and the human experimentation, all thriving with the full approval of the Emperor of the Seven Cities. If this passenger had so much to spare, what was he doing? Would she be complicit in something just by touching those cursed coins? But another thought occurred to her. That money could come in handy. A year of saving every check and not spending a single penny would still not equal what was in that bowl. She could get herself into an even better position. She could have actual savings again. Open a bank account and not keep all of her money in a sock under her pillow. She could finally go back to school and maybe go from cleaning hotels to running them. The two conflicting clouds of thought raged in Heather's mind. After a minute of thinking it over, Heather made her decision. She reached down and picked up the rag she dropped on the dresser. It wasn't worth it in her mind. Even if there were a million auras offered to her, knowing the poison that went into every single coin, that was something she could never carry. After picking up her rag, Heather noticed that there was a soft thumping inside the dresser, like something was trying to get out. Opening the drawer expecting there to be a small personal electronic, or maybe a small animal, instead what she saw was a large, black plastic bag. It filled up the entire drawer with a lump in the middle that was moving around. The bag was sealed and opaque, with the only clue of what might be inside was white letters on the bag that spelled Mimir. M-I-M-I-R. A word that Heather was unfamiliar with. And a strange logo of a golden sun surrounded by 8 silver crescent moons like the arrows of a compass rose, a logo that she was also unfamiliar with. Curious, but cautious, she reached her hand to touch the lump to feel what it was. Maybe it was some kind of toy. Maybe Mimir was some kind of electronic store for the rich and powerful. Feeling the lump, even through the black plastic, it felt cold, and it moved in a way electronics didn't. There were definitely muscles flexing, and the slick, irritating sound of smooth plastic rubbing against hair. There was something alive in this plastic bag, and it was trying to get out. Heather remembered the procedure when dealing with potentially smuggled animals. They were to be taken down to the customs officer, who would say whether it was safe or dangerous for the animal to be on board. Typically, the customs officer had to be called for, but Heather didn't want the poor creature to suffocate in the bag. So, breaking procedure, she picked up the bag and put it in the cart with the laundry, as she tried to rip a hole into the plastic. Whatever type of plastic it was, it didn't stretch and it didn't want to break. The creature inside thrashed more and more the longer Heather tried to open the bag. Heather was worried that it was starting to suffocate. Finally getting her nail into the plastic, Heather felt the plastic give, and there was a pop as air rushed into the bag. Heather stuck her fingers into the new hole, trying to whiten it as she felt whatever was inside bite her. "Ow!" she said, removing her fingers, seeing that crimson was leaking from her index finger. Whatever was in that bag tore a chunk of her skin clean off, and she was going to have to get it treated. Wrapping her hand in a clean cotton rag, Heather pushed the cart with the creature in the bag and some clothes lightly over it, so that no one would see it struggling around. It took Heather less than 5 minutes to push the cart to the service elevator and ride it down to the customs officer's office. Unlike the elevators reserved for guests, which were mostly glass and were featured prominently where it could be seen everywhere, the service elevators were entirely cold steel and hidden in the employees-only areas. They were built to lift up to 10 metric tons, and they were very large, even bigger than the room Heather slept in. The customs office was a small room down a narrow hall, ran by the officer known by everyone as Carl the Jarl, a play on words about how he treated his office, like his own little domain. The cages behind him were empty. The filing cabinets were closed and neat. Even the trash in the wastebasket was folded and put away. Carl was a white, very large man, nearly 7 feet tall, with a large scar dominating the left part of his head. The right side of his head had long red hair that he kept down to almost his shoulder. Rumor was on the ship that he had a metal plate put into his head as a result of a war injury, and that was why he was half bald. His desk, unlike his office, was chaos incarnate. Papers, sticky notes, pens, coffee mugs, and clipboards covered every square inch of the desk that didn't hold his small laptop. He bounced from one document to the other in no order that Heather could see, and he did it with incredible enthusiasm, like he was a starving man at a feast. Heather stood there for a moment before she spoke up. "Hello, sir? I think there is an animal in one of the rooms. I think we should do something about it." Carl, without looking up from his work, picked up a single clipboard with a pen attached by a pen and string. "Fill out this form and leave the creature in a cage for me to examine," Carl said in a bored voice. "You don't want to just check it out now?" Heather asked him. Carl finally paused and looked up at her, like she just asked him to kill his firstborn child. "There's paperwork that needs to be filled out," Carl the Jarl said, like that answered anything. Sighing to herself, Heather began to fill out the customs animal and fruit form. At least the bite didn't affect her writing hand. The form was similar to an incident form. Where did it happen? Was a passenger involved? Can she identify the animal? Did the animal harm her or another passenger? And did it cause damage to any property? After filling out the form to the best of her ability, she handed it back to Carl, who glanced over the form and asked Heather, "Can I see your bite?" Heather removed the cotton rag and showed her left hand to the customs officer. The wound was clotted over, and it didn't hurt anymore. But oddly enough, where the veins that were visible, they were looking more green than their normal blue. Carl, seeing the wound, immediately started writing on a small pad. "Okay, you're going to the clinic, and you're getting that cleaned out, and you're getting some antibiotics. You said you got bit 10 minutes ago?" "More or less, yeah." "Whatever that animal is, it's very sick. Infection's already setting in, and it's going to get septic unless you get some antibiotics on it now. Or else." Carl's statement hung in the air for a moment before he continued. "This note will get you out of work for the rest of the trip. Go see the doctor. You definitely need his help. If he tries to drag his feet, give him this note," Carl said, handing her a second note. "Go, hurry," Carl said before turning back to his paperwork. Heather, not sure what else to do, turned around and walked down the hallway, leaving the cart and the creature inside. Despite no longer pushing the cart, when she made it back to the service elevator, she was already panting, like she just ran a marathon. Standing at the elevator button, she pressed the call button, leaving behind a streak of blood on the button as it lit up. Didn't she have it covered with a rag? Looking back down the hallway, Heather saw the blood-soaked rag sitting on the floor, along with a trail of delicious-looking blood droplets leading to where she stood. So she removed a rubber glove from her apron to cover her bleeding hand. Before she put the glove on her hand, she looked over her wound. The green veins were spreading, making her hand look like it belonged to a green spider web. The scab where it was bitten was peeled away, and so was much of her skin on her index finger. But she didn't feel any pain or anything really in her hand. The blood leaking from her index finger had the look and consistency of barbecue sauce. It even smelled sweet to her. It oozed out slowly, and Heather was transfixed. Deciding it wouldn't hurt, she brought it to her mouth, and she tasted the thick sauce of her own blood. The taste was indeed sweet, but also savory. That little bit awoke a hunger deep within herself. It was like her stomach had grown a mouth of its own, and it was trying to tear its way out of her. The hunger continued to spread from her stomach, filling her entire body like a cold fire, freezing every nerve it came across and leaving only numbness and hunger inside. But still, the part of her mind that was still Heather slid the glove over her ruined hand, and she pushed the button for the top floor. She had to get to the infirmary. She was sick. She needed help. She needed hunger. The doors shut, and so did Heather's eyes. When they both opened again, what was behind them was no longer Heather. Taking steps out of the service elevator, the creature stalked, searching for its prey. The noise brought it forward, resting its hand on a wall, waiting for input to make a motion. Just behind it, a man with a child by his side and one on his back approached her. They were close enough that if they spoke, the creature would have struck and snacked on them. But instead, the man took a different path at the behest of his daughter. The creature continued to stand there, until it saw a door open and someone leave their room. The creature stalked forward. Still freshly turned, it moved very quickly. It still moved silently. The person leaving their room didn't have time to scream before the creature that used to be Heather was on top of them, its teeth tearing through their throats and their savory blood soaking the housekeeper's outfit. This blood wasn't sweet. It was only coppery and salty, but the creature enjoyed the taste of the blood on its hands far more than Heather ever did. And already, as the body's heartbeat under the creature's hand was stopped, the body began to turn cold, and it began to move. The meal was gone, and now there was another of its kind. Both creatures wandered away from each other, both trailing brown viscous blood as they sought to do the most basic of bacterial tasks: consume and multiply.